The proceeding will start.
Order, and welcome to today's session of the Transport Select Committee. This is the next session in our inquiry on strategic transport objectives. Before I invite the first panel to introduce themselves, just to avoid any misunderstandings, I'd just like to clarify the purpose of today's session. It's not about us making an appraisal of East West Rail as a whole or route options or anything like that. For us to do that would require a much more in-depth inquiry. What it is today is using East West Rail as a case study of how strategic decision making is effective or not across government. So I just wanted to put that on the record before we start. Could I invite each of the panellists to introduce themselves, starting with Mayor Wootton?
Well, good morning, everybody. My name's Tom. I'm the elected Mayor of Bedford, elected last May. So I've got 3 and a bit years left to go. So, miracles do happen, and I'm here.
Thank you.
I hope not a miracle. So, Andy Williams, I'm the chair of the Oxford-Cambridge Supercluster Board. So the Supercluster Board is supported by about 50 businesses and enterprises across the region, representing the largest companies, global investors, local enterprise partnerships, and the universities, all looking for how we can maximise the benefits of East West Rail for the region and the wider UK economy.
Thank you.
I'm Naomi Green. I'm Managing Director of England's Economic Heartland, the subnational transport body for the region covering the Oxford to Cambridge area. England's Economic Heartland is also the Secretariat for the East West Main Line Partnership, a partnership that has been in existence for over 26 years, promoting the principle of a rail connection between Oxford and Cambridge.
Thank you, and we're grateful to all of you for giving us your time and evidence this morning. If I may start with a fairly high-level question and ask you to set out what you understand to be the strategic case for East West Rail and what needs to happen to ensure those strategic case objectives are met. Naomi, if I could perhaps start with you.
Well, thank you very much, Chair. And I think on behalf of England's Economic Heartland, we are a body formed of all the local authorities in the region. And I think it's fair to say we are fortunate to represent a very special place. The Oxford to Cambridge area offers a significant economic opportunity for communities and businesses, not just between Oxford and Cambridge, but across the UK. Jobs created in our region, I'm sure you'll hear more from Andy Williams, are not competing with our friends in Birmingham or Yorkshire and the Humber, but actually with places like Shenzhen, Toronto and Singapore. 2 of the top 5 universities in the world are represented in this region, and they're supported by a wider network of universities like Cranfield and the Open University, all leaders in their field. So the case for East West Rail is absolutely central to that narrative of an economic opportunity for the region. There are pressures in our region on housing, on our environmental assets, on land for businesses to grow, on our impact on the environment, and particularly in the context of transport. Transport emissions in the EEH region are 8% higher than the national average. And actually productivity is lower in our region than the national average. All signs that there is a need for better connection and better opportunities to make the most of what the region can achieve. The principle of rail connectivity is actually a story of the place. It's not a story just of the transport scheme, and I think that's where the strategic objectives for the Department for Transport, when you actually look at them, the scheme more than meets those strategic objectives. But the challenge is when you start to look at how the economic appraisal process, which is two-dimensional, necessarily two-dimensional in approach, can actually be delivered in the specific context of a place. And the place conditions that allow that scheme to flourish. Our expectation and our need from government is for all the different government departments to come together to achieve the opportunity of a region like ours. That's not just science and technology, business and trade, but actually DEFRA, the Department for Health, Department for Education, so that all aspects of the place can collectively be achieved together.
Okay, thank you. I'll want to come back on a couple of those points in a minute, but Andy first.
So Supercluster recognises the strengths of Oxford and Cambridge, both top 5 global universities. I think sometimes, it's like football analogy, everyone's globally competitive. It's extraordinary we have 2 of the top 5 global universities in our region. But they're constrained. They generate huge amounts of intellectual property, huge amounts of ideas. They translate those into ideas, but they're constrained. So you're seeing 10 to 12% growth year on year on the life science sector in Cambridge, and yet it's short of 1 million square feet of R&D space. So what we need to do is spread those benefits from Oxford and Cambridge out into a much wider region. So with the wider region that we have connected to East West Rail, you go from a travel to work area for an Oxford or Cambridge of around 500,000 to a connected area of 3.5 to 4 million people. That's really important to give you the critical mass. And as you spread that out, you bring in the other clusters within the region around Cranfield, the motor racing industry, and things like that as well. And what you need to do is compare this perhaps with the global situation, whereas Oxford and Cambridge both compete pretty well globally, despite what we say. So you have Boston, San Francisco. We're able to compete with those despite our size. But the newer model that places like Amsterdam, as you mentioned, in Israel, in Canada, they're starting to connect their clusters together as well to create their own versions of Supercluster, because they recognise the only way to compete globally is to have the critical mass to be able to do so. So we believe that at the moment the science and technology sector in our region is completely constrained by infrastructure and various other factors as well. If we can release those, it provides a huge base for science and technology just within the region, and through the connectivity provided through East-West Rail, connections up to the north, up to Manchester, Strathclyde, Leeds, Newcastle, all where there are quite strong science and technology clusters, but which we don't have the access to at the moment that we should be able to have. So it's connectivity, it's critical mass.
Okay, thank you. And Tom, as mayor of an area in between the two
Indeed.
university cities, do you share those strategic benefits?
Those ambitions are absolutely fantastic, but one does feel the squashed in the middle because, you know, we are the whipping boys for everybody else's ambition, and this does feel pretty hard times at times. You know, especially some of the stuff around the consultations and all this sort of stuff that has gone on has been particularly badly handled. I am unique in that I think I'm unique that our area is about the only area that the government has decided to put 10 miles of dual carriageway linking Bedford to Cambridge. That is a fantastic great news, linking the A1 and all this sort of stuff. And one can only compare the Highways Agency's attitude to the people and how they were going to deal with parish councils to those of East West Rail. And East West Rail is the thing you're looking at today of how they have done their consultation, and it has been pretty poor in many stages. And you can compare that to the Highways Agency because it's the same company, and more or less, and how they have actually championed parish councils. So when it came to the crunch, those parish councils never said a word at any inquiries and kept quiet, and the dual carriageway has now started, and thank God it has. Long waited. So we're going to get our dual carriageway link from Bedford through to Cambridge. It's utterly fantastic. East West Rail, the complete opposite. They're all having whip rounds and trying to stump up the cash to fight them all the way. And it's a very, very hard thing for people to understand just how bitter many of those people feel in how East West Rail have treated the locals. So, you know, we're in favour of East West Rail. We think East West Rail is a great idea, you know, but it's the route that has been the problem. And the route they have chosen isn't one that many people back.
Thank you, and we'll dig into these issues later in the session. But before I turn to colleagues, can I just, you've set out a rosy picture of the economic and wider ambitions that can be realised with this project. But why then is the benefit-cost ratio so low for the line itself? And just as a supplementary to that, is that calculation properly encapsulating all the wider costs and benefits that are related to it?
I mean, I think if you look at the the way the department has developed an economic appraisal process for any scheme, and then the recent update to the Treasury Green Book, which has tried to overcome some of the weaknesses of an economic appraisal process in isolation, they still both come with a level of uniformity. So capturing time savings, capturing all of those uniform things that you can measure and quantify. What they fail to do is capture the likelihood of success that is highly dependent on the context that particular scheme it sits within. So the benefits of having it, which then when you talk about individual examples of people living in the region, you can see how that works, but it's hard to macro that up. So just to give you an example, I know of a young gentleman who is 16 who wanted to take advantage of the opportunities out of Silverstone. He lives in the Corby area, and actually wanted to go to Silverstone UTC, a fabulous opportunity for developing engineers in the region. He could not access that opportunity on a day-to-day basis because there was no public transport option for him. So at 16 years old, he had to move and stay in a B&B in the week to be able to access those facilities. Now, there's a barrier there for a lot of people whose parents couldn't afford to support that option. And yet we know that 20% of engineers are due to retire in the next 2 years. So we've got a looming shortfall of engineers. That's a huge pressure for Silverstone and Motorsport Valley, but not a solution for young people to access the opportunities of that. As an example, that actually you couldn't quantify easily because that is an example of an individual, and that macroing that up in the case of an economic appraisal is very hard to do. If I may add one further comment, the Department for Transport did some work last year on transformational benefits of economic schemes. That was published, I think, in the summer of 2023. And if you look, for example, at the Nottingham Express tramway, the transformational benefits of that are quite hard to quantify. Does that mean, in a traditional appraisal process, does that mean that we shouldn't have done that? And actually, if you look at the impact of not investing in these major transformational public transport schemes, what you see in our case, in the case of the Oxford to Cambridge region, is this huge pressure on transport emissions because there is no alternative, and actually a pressure on productivity, which is already lower than the national average.
I understand the difficulty of quantifying those wider potential benefits, but what about quantifying the wider costs as well? For example, on the water demand and water supplies and other utilities. How can we better encapsulate that so that when we're looking more widely than the narrow ECR for a case, we can make a more objective appraisal?
I think that's a very fair question, and again, I think that's where bringing the place more closely aligned with government departments who have the wider objectives for those things, such as DEFRA, would allow us to have a much more two-way conversation about how we manage some of those trade-offs. At the moment, that happens in a very piecemeal way in the region, working with the government departments, and I don't think we have been able to create traction on all the different factors that allow a place to overcome the barriers. So, for example, and you will all know this from your own constituents, often if people hear about new housing opportunities, local residents will be concerned about access to GP facilities, education spaces in schools, etc. But the ability of our local partners to leverage their conversations with the Department for Health and Department for Education are very limited, and therefore that holistic conversation between the silo mentality of Whitehall, which is necessary in making decisions, with a very overarching place-based focus of individual places needs to be strengthened to allow us to overcome some of those barriers.
Before I turn to colleagues, Andy or Tom, do you have anything to add to that?
Costs is the one thing that I think will crop up again and again, because many of us feel that the costs haven't been done properly, and we feel that the East West Rail is trying to pull the government into starting something where they don't really know how much it's going to cost. The HS2 problem cropping up again. We really feel that there are cheaper, flatter alternative routes. There's about 7 or 8 of them. We don't think they've been investigated. So when you talk about costs, how can you actually talk about costs when you don't know how much the thing's going to cost overall? And there is cheaper options. Now, one of the protest groups has banged on to me several times. They think there's about £1 billion worth of difference between the shorter, cheaper, flatter route and the route that the East West Rail has chosen. Now, that's quite a lot of money to a council. I think we could run our council about 7 or 8 years in a row without going back to the public. But to the government, that's probably so much. But that is a real large sum of money that is the difference between the shorter, flatter route and the one that goes through the hills to the north of Bedford. And, of course, has to buy up all the houses that they're going to knock down, build 2 new stations and a great big multi-storey car park. You know, these things are expensive and they're not needed.
Thank you. Andy, do you have anything to...
Yeah, I was going to say something different. I think the fact the Supercluster board exists at all is because businesses are changing the way they're thinking about things, so they're thinking much more about their place-based strategies. So in my previous role at AstraZeneca, I implemented the place-based strategy for Cambridge. And when you start doing that, you come across all sorts of strange and unusual barriers. So you need to sort out the education where people are going to live, the water, the power. Suddenly from going from a single science focus, you go to having to go cross-departmental. And I have to say, that was extremely challenging. Actually, it was reasonably simple at local level because they appointed a single person to look after that. But at national level, we were having to cross multiple departments to get things done. And I'm starting to see reflections of that in the place-based strategy for the wider region, that we do need some way of reflecting a sort of strategic overview onto these projects. And it's why businesses are getting sucked more into discussions around water, is because they're beginning to see that without the quality of life, you're not going to be able to attract the level of employee. Without the housing, you're not going to be able to attract people. And so it's becoming a much more holistic picture which businesses are engaging in, but we don't really have an effective interface with central government on that.
Okay, thank you. Greg?
Thank you, Chairman. Just before I ask my main question around the National Audit Office report, Ms Green, can you just clarify how East West Rail would in any way, shape or form assist a boy in Corby get to Silverstone?
So accessing down to Bedford and then crossing across to Bletchley and then being able to connect further down from there. So I think having better access to Bletchley, Milton Keynes and then down to Winslow. I appreciate that then requires a first last mile solution beyond that, but I think that's an absolutely critical part of the East-West rail story, is about getting good first last mile access so as many people as possible can access the railway.
Okay. We'll maybe have a more detailed discussion about that afterwards, but Silverstone's a 35-minute drive from Bletchley. But the National Audit Office report, back to all of you, wasn't what you would classically call glowing towards East-West Rail. First of all, what was your, presuming you've all seen it, reaction to the National Audit Office findings? And within that, if you could reflect in your answers, probably the biggest challenge that they threw up was the absolute lack of any strategic alignment across government about this, which actually goes to the heart of the problem. It goes to the heart of the whole original concept of the Oxford to Cambridge arc, which my county, Buckinghamshire, fully pulled out of and said we will have nothing more to do with this. Where do the fault lines lie in your mind as to whether this is cart before horse or horse before cart when it comes to East-West Rail and that old arc concept that actually has been completely poo-pooed by some counties within it, including my own? Who wants to go first?
I don't mind starting. I think so. I fully recognise the NAO report, actually. I thought there's some great recommendations in there. But to step back a little bit, 2 or 3 years ago, the whole East Wales project was under threat, and we were hearing negative stories about that. And actually, the Supercluster board formed to turn that argument around and make it more about the economic benefits of it than other aspects of it. And the decision by the government to reaffirm its commitment to East West Rail has changed business confidence in that short period of time, even without East West Rail being built. So I'm already seeing now additional investment opportunities coming forward as a consequence of East West Rail being back on the table than before. And I think you'll hear announcements quite soon about investments being made in the ARC, the Oxford-Cambridge region, as a consequence of East West Rail now progressing.
No.
Well, so from an EEH perspective, forgive me sort of starting from our lens before we go into the broader comments, a concern for us was that the NAA report failed to recognise the role of, failed to explore the role of local and regional bodies, both in the public and the private sector, in the kind of opportunity for delivery of East West Rail. While that's not in their remit, we can't... It reinforces the gap between local and regional partners working with central government to achieve a whole aim if there is a report that stops without the other half. And therefore the report talked about what government can do, which is very important, and creating those synergies across the government, across the departments is a really important part of a solution for any region. This is not just about the Oxford-Cambridge region, how those government departments work together. In our case, how we can maximise the opportunity of an investment like East West Rail is an important one. But actually, the whole story of a local area being able to influence and shape what the outcomes are for our region is really important, rather than it being a top-down approach, which the ARC at the time was.
It was disappointment, really, because we're so positive. We want best things to happen to our borough and best things to happen to Bedford. You know, this is what I'm doing, bigging up our town. You know, we've got great investment coming. Perhaps we'll hear a bit more about that. But it was a disappointment that the audit office had found them with their pants down, and such a poor... And I got the recommendations here, and, you know, it just... They have not done their homework, and they hadn't done it well, and the audit office caught them out. And I just feel it was something that the government and the Treasury ought to lead on and start doing more of this, because it is something that we feel they are leading the government in the wrong direction. Literally choosing a route that is the most expensive when there are other cheaper, flatter routes that are not as hard to build and would probably be easier to build. And this audit report, you know, just lays out again and again failings of East West Rail. It's a damning report, really, and it's something that, you know, when it says, you know, the HM Treasury should head up on establishing a cross-government shared vision. I mean, this sort of stuff is pretty horrible for East West Rail to read, and you probably might be asking those questions, you know, later on this morning.
So you very much put the finger there on the Treasury as the body that cross-government. Let's face it, in government, all roads lead back to the Treasury. But given East West Rail is a Department for Transport project, but it's part of this bigger thing that is controversial. I alluded to it, within my own constituency and county, pulled out of the leaders group of the ARC, etc. It is a controversial thing. It's not some universally celebrated concept. Who in government do you think should be leading on this project? Should it revert to being just a DFT project, building a railway that in some way can be useful? Or do you want it to be Treasury-led or DLUF-led? Where in government do you think should be leading this?
The trouble is, I'm a local government person. You know, I'm not an expert, but looking at this, who is the one that's going to sign off the cheques? Who is the one that's actually going to be accountable for that taxpayer's money? And who is the one that's actually going to say, this route is better than that route? This route's going to cost £1 billion more than that route. Who is it that's going to make that decision? And that is a very, very tough one, and it's one that comes down to ministers. And I think it's got to be probably quite seriously high in the ministry to make that sort of decision, because it's, you know, we've got once in 100 years to get this right. And if you get it wrong, you're more or less building a white elephant. Remember, the old Varsity line didn't make money and it closed. You know, we've got this job to get it right. And we don't want to build a white elephant that's not a very good route for freight, that probably won't be encouraging passengers. We want something that's actually going to work. And this report is pretty damning.
So who's reaching out to you from government as a mayor on the line of route for the next phase of East West Rail from government? Anybody? Are you wading through treacle, or are you Are you talking to DLUC? Are you talking to the Treasury? Are you talking to the DFT? Or
You are being very perceptive. I think I've had about 1 or 2 phone calls since I was elected. I don't think elected mayors are regularly tapped up by anybody and pretty much left to get on with themselves. But I've had a job to get an appointment to see Mr. Merriman.
Okay. Can I bring in Dr. Williams and Ms. Green on this point of who's in charge of this thing? Where should it sit? Should it just be a DFT project? Should it be led by DLUC? What's your perception?
Well, I think certainly, first of all, it's fair to say, I know this is the case for Dr. Williams as well, local partners have not to date had any engagement with the Treasury Growth Board that the NAO report it said had been formed. So my concern is that since its creation, as set out in the report in September 23, the Growth Board has operated in isolation of local perspectives and views, and I think that is a concern because again they're missing the opportunity to have the conversation about what is happening. So this is about East West Rail, what is happening in even those authorities that aren't part of any partnership that's been formed. The opportunity for East West Rail is still being enabled in all sorts of areas through better connectivity, etc. So I think that is a real concern. In terms of where it sits, I think it is actually a classic case that no one government department can leverage the benefits of a scheme like this. Because it is about science, innovation, it's about trade and business, and actually all of those government departments have a role to play in enabling this region to achieve its economic opportunities that Dr. Williams talked about earlier. It's certainly not DLUC, because I don't think this is about housing. It's about economic growth, of which ensuring local communities across the region, not just on the route, have access to those economic opportunities.
Just for clarity, you don't believe this to be anything to do with housing?
No, I didn't say that. I said it's not just about housing. It's about achieving economic growth, of which ensuring people who are accessing jobs have good quality places to live, be that near or further away. So my example of somewhere in North Northamptonshire, like Wellingborough, for example, again, not on the route of East West Rail, but 12 minutes from Bedford, where 4,500 houses are currently being built right next to the train station, is part of that story. It's not a housing story, it's an economic growth story.
There's a big perception problem there, though, isn't there? Because I can assure you from my constituency, and a massive reason why Buckinghamshire pulled out of the old Art Leaders Group was because it is perceived to be about housing. There was even that figure, which now thankfully does seem to have been dropped, of inverted commas ambition for 1 million homes. I mean, that's about as toxic as it gets when you put that. You know, that is not what people wish to see their countryside between Oxford and Cambridge turned into. You know, it's essentially building a city between the cities. Yeah. That is deeply unpopular. And so my question to you is that off the back of this NAO report, who should be in charge of this thing to actually build a useful railway rather than do anything else?
In my opinion, in order to capture all of the opportunities across the region, I think it does have to sit in Treasury because it's an economic growth opportunity. But, of course, the DFT, from an accountable body perspective, has a role to play as well.
Dr. Williams.
I was going to start with your sort of geopolitical boundaries, whereas, just to be clear, the Supercluster does not have political geographical boundaries. So, for example, Stevenage is happily within our Supercluster. Buckinghamshire University is part of the Supercluster. So we are friends with everybody, and we try to work collectively. You're going to find this. So I talked about place-based strategy. So it's a trick question. If you need a place-based strategy, you need obviously cross-governmental work and a single person in charge of it. But you'll probably be amused to find that within the Supercluster, we actually think DCIT are probably a good place to lead it. because if the economic value is going to be driven out of the increase in science and technology, which is one of the fastest growing sectors, one of the most high R&D intensive sectors, which we're trying to become a UK science superpower, and then DSIT is a reasonable place to sit that from a supercluster perspective. Now, maybe they coordinate it through the local level because it's local industry is going to work, but we believe that they have a strong role to play if it is part of their global ambitions.
I'm going to be a little bit different because I feel very strongly these recommendations that come through should be looked at in detail. And, it says East West Rail should ensure a full business case for East West Rail. And it lists all the stuff. Somebody's got to check that, because at the minute we're being told that the consultation's going to go through and we won't know how much it costs. They're going to get so far down the rabbit hole before we find out how much things cost. That is the trouble. They're leading the government on. We need to know how much this thing's going to cost. At the minute, it's all been desktop studies. There have been very little stuff done on the ground. They could easily look at the alternative routes. This is something that Treasury should be looking at, going, how is it we got to this place and we're not going to find out till we've got more or less planning permission before we find out how much things cost? That is lunacy, because you then can't go back and say, actually, there's a cheaper route here or a cheaper route there. This should be done now. It is, the business case and the recommendations of this report are vital that the Treasury get hold of and say, actually, we need to have a handle on this. We need to understand, what's happening, because if we get too far down the line, this June they're coming out to consultation, the whole thing's building a momentum of its own before anybody's done the sums of working out how much it costs. And that's exactly what happened with HS2. And I'm really frightened that, when you're keen on something and you want it to happen, we're going to have an HS2 situation where, the country isn't flush with money, and this will be something that's up for it. I really feel strongly that the Treasury ought to be looking at the details of the costs of what's going on and how it is, and the alternatives to the routes. Why choose the most expensive route when there are other places to go that are shorter, cheaper, easier to build? A year less building in the shorter routes. And there are council studies that we've done, more or less looking at this and proving it. So, and a load of other protest groups have also done a lot of work on the other routes. And this is something I feel very strongly that the Treasury ought to lead on and say, actually, that value for money, I have to do a business case if I'm spending a few £1,000s of council money. There ought to be a very, very good business case for the amount of money they can spend on this.
Thank you.
Before I turn to Graham, I'd just like to ask a supplementary on that. You've said the Treasury should be the body that takes that overall view. There are some who would criticise that and say Treasury isn't the right body because it takes too short-term and narrow a sort of definition and appraisal of costs and benefits. I don't want to get into a big economic theory debate, but would there not be a better location somewhere else in the centre of government, that whether it's a cabinet committee, the Cabinet Office, number 10 itself, that can take a more strategic overview and commission the Treasury and DEFRA and all the other departments to put forward their different options? And
I'll bow to you chaps, and you have great experience of central government. I have experience of local government and how we do stuff. I just know that there needs to be a committee of somebody who are very expert at these sort of things, looking at the business cases and understanding exactly what you're commissioning, because that's how we got into the HS2 mess. We commissioned stuff we didn't really know how much it was going to cost. We should know how much things cost before you commission them. That is something that any businessman would know. You must know how much that railway is costing. And to get the cost about halfway through when you've got planning permission already and you've done years of work, it's all too late. There are cheaper routes we're not investigating. And there should be a committee somewhere in government that sort of chases up value for money.
Naomi, Andy, as people who observe the machinery of government, is the Treasury the right place?
I think it's a very fair observation. I was thinking about, as you were talking, the IPA and whether that sort of model, but again, they look much more at things in project delivery and more immediate things as well. I think the NIC did some work in this region, but again, probably created a misleading. At the time, it led us down a path that didn't reflect the science and innovation focus of this. For me, I think wherever it sits, the key thing is getting it right with local and regional partners, because that's where actually the long-term interests are retained and held, because of the nature of local government and the relationships they have locally.
You're quite right. You're highlighting local and regional partners, so I'll come with the other directions. I think it would be, I don't know where it should sit. I like DSIT because we're all science and technology businesses. What we would plea for is that we're more engaged in the process of government, that we don't want things done to us. Wherever the line goes, we'd like to be involved so that we know how those decisions are made. We often hear about these global investors as some sort of mysterious body and you never know who they are. We have global investors with over $1 trillion of assets under management on the Supercluster board. We already kind of know what you need to do. We just need to be involved in helping you sort it out. Businesses, we have the largest businesses in the UK on the Supercluster board. Very happy to provide advice. We shouldn't be decision makers. You're right, it's public money, but I think a closer relationship between the business community and central government would be helpful.
Great, thank you. Graham.
Thanks, Chair. Naomi, I think you've answered the question about the need for improved communication. I think you've all answered that question, but I wonder if I might just explore some of the earlier answers, if you don't mind. As the Chairman explained at the outset, the purpose of the Transport Committee's inquiry is to look at strategic planning between governments for major infrastructure projects. And incidentally, I served for 9 months on the Hybrid Bill Committee for HS2, so I'm very familiar with representations that are made by individuals, lobby groups, environmental groups, parish councils and larger councils in respect of route variations and mitigation. So I understand all of that. What I'd like to understand is, why is it possible in other countries, for example in Japan, who planned their first high-speed rail line between Tokyo and Osaka in 1959 and delivered it in 1964. They have 2,800 miles of high-speed rail, that we seem incapable of doing that. Is it a lack of strategic vision? Is it because we keep lobbying to change the route? It seems to me it is quite important to have a strategic vision, to know what benefits are coming and to deliver that. I'm not saying not to take account of local views, but I just think it's very damaging to business confidence to change your mind regularly in terms of route and viability. Dr. Williams, can I ask you first?
Just to agree with everything you've said. I think the other thing is if you go back to the Boston example, build it and they will come. They had a vision. They were going to build a life science sector. Boston was not a life science sector 20, 30 years ago. It is now. And I think one of the things you find in the UK is you can't build something unless you've got absolutely everything nailed down. You know exactly how many people are going to use it. You know, a vision and a strategy is something you get behind in business and you deliver. So I couldn't agree more with what you said.
Naomi Green, could I ask you if you have any particular thoughts on that?
I mean, I think the appraisal process in itself fails to let us follow some of that build it and they will come mentality. I think one of the things that we've got to do more of is ask the question of what would happen if we didn't get behind this scheme, what would happen to our region, and that is in terms of carbon emissions, productivity, choice. It's not something that I think would be it's
well,
hard
you
to
did
do.
mention that in your opening remarks, the challenges of the environmental challenges and the issues of addressing transport emissions. So is part of the argument the shared vision that it would help to address those challenges?
Absolutely, and I'm sure in the next session you can talk to Beth West about the kind of evidence behind that. But certainly from a subnational transport body perspective, the principle of giving people a true realistic public transport connection across the region is front and centre of our approach.
I was going to ask you about the Treasury's Economic Growth Board. You have answered that in response to earlier questions. I wonder if I might ask Mayor Wootton about some of the issues that he's raised about alternative routes, and whether he accepts the view, I think shared by Dr. Williams, that introducing uncertainty is really bad for business confidence and potential investment. It's also bad for householders whose houses may be blighted and have some kind of financial impact on them and their personal circumstances. And Mayor Wootton?
Right. First off, we're in favour of East West Rail. We think it's a great idea. Changing the route wouldn't actually mean changing stations, because we're going south of Bedford instead of north. We end up in the same place. So when you look at a map, you start in the same place, you end up in the same place. You have exactly the same stations. You're using the same stuff. What you're doing is following more or less towards the south and looking at other routes, cheaper, flatter routes. So that's the first thing. The second thing is it is really blighting on those houses and those people who's going to lose those houses in the Poets area of Bedford. They have lived under this threat for years now, and it is really grinding on them. And it started off about 90 odd houses. It's slowly come down to less and less because they've looked at the route more carefully. But it is a large number of people who I really feel for, who are under threat of demolition. And it's something that's really, really weighing on me quite heavily.
Can I just ask about the consultation? Because my understanding is that East West Rail had looked at a number of alternatives initially, including that more direct, flatter route rather than the Northern Arc. Were you involved in those consultations, or was that after you were elected?
Right, I was a councillor, but I wasn't elected mayor, and it was some time ago. And it's an example of a botched consultation. So when I talked about the Highways Agency and how they did stuff and how they're linking us, the dual carriageway, they have done things so much differently, so differently compared with East West Rail. There was whole villages missed out of the consultation that are actually on the line. And there's a large number of very angry parish councils who are saying, you had consultation, you didn't include us. And they spend a lot of time in the consultation working in and around Bedford and seem to forget many of the rural bits that should have been included.
I'm just trying to get at the point about the purpose of our inquiry. We're looking at East West Rail as an example, but we're looking at cross-departmental working, particularly between the Department of Transport and in relation to the housing benefits and the broader economic benefits. When the case has been made, strategically, based on shared objectives, a shared vision, isn't there a strong argument for saying we should stick to that? I'm just thinking of my experience on HS2 with the variations around the Goulthorpe link, the additional cost that generated, the additional uncertainty, the impact it had on business confidence in Manchester. Is that we clearly have to mitigate and take account, but I'm not quite certain, I'm not convinced in my own mind that individual parish councils should have a veto on a major strategic scheme costing £6 billion.
Personally, I think it's very important to bring people with you, and how the Highways Agency brought people with them when they made this decision is absolutely critical. And when you look at it and you go, actually, I'm arguing for something that will be cheaper, that might actually save the scheme, because HS2 was cancelled because it was too much money. If you can save £1 billion by going south, not north, or look at other routes, this is something they should be looking at, because in the long run, it will save the whole project, which is something we're really keen on.
But earlier on you mentioned, or rather Naomi Green mentioned, the Treasury had set up an economic growth board. Are these arguments that should be made to the Treasury's economic growth board? And what is the local manifestation of that in your region that you can feed into? Do you have a method? I mean, you obviously have political connections. You're the same political persuasion as the current government.
I have to be very careful what I say because I get myself in an awful lot of trouble and get told off from a high level. So, it's very difficult because on one hand, I have been ignored and we haven't been spoken to. On the other hand, I have investors coming from America who are going to invest in our borough who the government have bent over backwards to be welcoming to. So,
but you see, Mel, help us out here because we are trying to do a report.
Yeah.
And we want to come up with some recommendations and identify some areas that need to be addressed. So if that's a failure, then please say so, and we'll flag that up.
In some areas, they could do better. In other areas, where I've got these Americans coming in and they're wanting to invest in our area, the government really has stepped up to the mark. We did months and months work with them, and then we handed over to the government. And I thought, that was it. And then within a few days, they'd put a special task force together to actually encourage them. That's something exciting. That's central government actually saying, come on, we want this. And so they can do it when they want to.
I wish central government would spend £6 billion in my region on the lean sideline and improving rail infrastructure. Sorry, Naomi.
Thank you. Can I just respond to the point you made further about where in the growth board should be focusing? So locally, we are strengthening a kind of collaboration between the Science Supercluster Board, England's Economic Heartland, the ARC Universities Group, for example, to ensure that that local level of working is much more visible, so that then central government can see where to touch into rather than on specific themes, and that's that's an important part of that. When you talk about which parts of the growth board, I will come back to as a really important recommendation, if I may, as a witness, what Dr. Williams said about DSIT and Department of Business and Trade, and that they are really important stories for our departments for our region. More than perhaps at the moment where the perception is, which is more of a historic perception, I would argue. There is a need for supporting communities, but not in isolation of that really important part.
Okay, thank you. Jeff.
Jack.
Thank you, Chair. And I particularly wanted to ask a little bit more, and we'll start with Naomi, about the development and economic opportunities as a result of East West Rail, and particularly around some of those stations. And the government obviously identified £15 million of funding for local authorities to look into some of this and to develop those opportunities. Could you detail maybe a bit of the progress that's made on that?
Yes, it's a conversation that is rightly between East West Rail Company and the individual local authorities. There is a need for conversation across the board about what it looks like as a region, but actually the democratic planning process is at local authority level, and that's where those conversations are happening. And I'm sure in the second session you'll hear more, or you can probe more with Beth West about kind of those conversations. But from a coordination perspective, we believe firmly that they should be delivered at local authority level through the planning processes that each individual local authority have in place, wherever they are in their local plan process.
Are you seeing the development, and private investment coming on the back of the infrastructure that is being, put in and proposed in some of those communities?
So EEH isn't monitoring that, right. But I suspect I'm sure Mayor Wootton will have examples. So for an example that I have heard from Milton Keynes Council is the relocation of KPMG to Bletchley, which has happened as a result of the regeneration of Bletchley and the opportunity of the East West Rail station in Bletchley. A number of businesses have relocated to Bletchley already in advance of the East West Rail station being open. But actually that is an example of where you are seeing businesses already responsive to those station opportunities. But when it comes to the specifics of a location, we rightly leave that to the conversation with individual local authorities.
Mayor Wootton, did you want to comment on that and the potential economic development as a result of this infrastructure investment?
Well, they've talked about the 15 billion or 15 million, but we haven't received any formal proposals yet. So there's a lot of talk. We haven't nailed down any actual money yet. And that is the trouble, because it's been hurry up and wait on the whole scheme. And one of the problems, I think, is because it's been dragged out. Hurry up and wait, hurry up, this is going to hurry, you've got to get on with it. And then long periods of nothing seems to happen. And that is another problem with this whole scheme. Houses have been blighted, people have been worried, and it's been a long time coming. And the economic benefit, we have done several studies in and around Bedford, and we know that if the train comes close and the train backs in and drives out, or drives in, backs out, and doesn't actually come through the middle of town and destroy the houses, the economic benefit to the town is just as good. Virtually identical, at the point of very, very close to the train coming right the way through the middle and going out the top and destroying the houses and doing all the damage. It's so close that it's very difficult to actually tell them apart, and it's something that we've done quite a lot of work on, because it was a real political thing. That do you back a train that's going to do a lot of damage, or do you back something that's to the south? So it was a real it's a real political hot potato about whether you back something that's going to do a lot of damage but might bring a lot of benefit, or do you actually So we've tried to nail down the economic benefit as much as we can, and it will make quite a lot of difference to Bedford. Whether it comes through the middle or comes very close and has a spur is virtually identical on the cash for the town and the benefit to the town. But it saves all those houses and saves the northern villages as well. So it's one of those swings and roundabouts. And again, what you've got is a large project that it hasn't nailed down the details and has been going a very long time and just hasn't done the detailed work. What have they been doing all this time?
And obviously you've done this report on this. Was that the main findings that came out of the report that you commissioned?
We weighed up all the different routes. We tried to be as neutral as we could. We've done had consultants, rail consultants, look at it, and we've had people look at the economic benefits. So there are a number of reports I can share with the committee and share with you and say, look, this is what we've done.
I wanted to also ask, because obviously we've got different government departments who are working on this. We've obviously got DFT, but also DLUC, who have a significant role also in terms of the economic growth, the housing development and economic growth and levelling up side of this. So is there a bit of a disconnect perhaps between those departments and what the priorities are? Maybe you want to go first.
Well, we've been dealing with the rail people about the railway, that the housing and stuff that's coming, it's not connected to the East West Rail in any way I could see.
Right.
Now I know there's great ambitions around East West Rail, but that's with the next door council when they get down the road. We only get one station and our town's all around it. So the next, you can talk to the executive of East West Rail later on about how is it going to bring houses and growth? Because that's up to a local council to put in their local plan, not for the East West Rail company to tell somebody that there's thousands of houses going to come there.
Do any of our other witnesses want to comment? Yes, maybe Dr. Williams.
So if you accept anecdotes, so people often come to me based in Cambridge and having a lot of experience in life sciences, usually developers saying, how about this as a development opportunity, would you support it? And the answer is always no, obviously. But the first time, and so what we're seeing post East West Rail progression to its state, as I said earlier, we're starting to see increased business investment in Oxford and Cambridge, which you'd expect kind of anyway. But the first time ever, I've been asked about a life science opportunity around the Bedfordshire area. So a fairly major development that they're toying with based on that. But the question they asked me was, there was a particular sort of life science development they were talking about, and so would that fit in with the life science strategy? And so the one thing we're really missing in the region, there is no economic strategy. So I'd like to see the £15 million go to some way to say, what should our economic strategy be across the wider region. Now, Naomi will correct me and say, well, that needs to be a place, that needs to be owned by the local councils and the regional bodies. But I'm thinking wider than just the region, I'm thinking about the national strategy as well. How do we ensure that the vast opportunities created by Oxford and Cambridge first benefit places like Bedfordshire, then the wider region, and then how do they feed through the mainline connections up to Manchester, which is where the life science manufacturing strategy is, up to Strathclyde, across to Leeds and Newcastle. So I'd like the £15 million to at least some of it to start thinking about, can we have an economic strategy which starts to ensure that opportunities genuinely spread out, rather than being just another opportunity for Oxford and Cambridge.
Do you think that we're perhaps missing out on private investment as a result of not getting that strategy right?
I think what you're getting is a misalignment.
Right.
So the government may well have its own vision and its strategy, but it's not particularly working with business on it. They've obviously the trade bodies, ABPI and BIA, for the life science sector, looking at it as well, but the alignment's not as good as it could be. So I give an answer to the developer based on my experience of what sort of thing would go in Bedfordshire, quite close to Stevenage, might give you a feel for the sort of activity it's going to be. There was a new triangle forming between Bedford, Stevenage and Cambridge, but it's my view. BIA will have a view, ABPI will have a view, but government will not have that view. And better alignment in that view would help.
I actually agree, Dr. Williams, but I think the key thing is about having local partners and national government aligned on an economic strategy so we can enable that. Because I don't think the opportunity for enabling science and innovation in the region is disputed. I think there is appetite for it. The nuances, as Mayor Wootton said, of individual places and how they want to respond from a housing perspective, it is our policy that is very much for the local area through the democratically elected local authority in the planning process.
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, you wanted to come with a supplementary.
Yeah, just a quick one with regard to the identifying opportunities for economic growth. I'm wondering what, if anything, has been done to look at other projects. Clearly we've had the Borders Railway in Scotland, which was the biggest new railway in the UK in 100 years. Has been obviously hugely teething problems initially because it was so successful. It could have been, and it probably should have been, future-proofed for double tracking, etc., and wasn't at the time. And yet the naysayers, including the IEA at the outset, said the decision to build the Borders Railway was insane. They described it as insane, yet it has been extraordinarily popular now, looking to extend it. And obviously there's been lots of economic development along the lines, a new town being built, and tourism's increased massively, etc., etc. So what are the key learns from Borders Railway that you would apply to East-West to not make some of the kind of the lack of ambition, if I want to put it that way, that was displayed at the start of Borders Railway?
I can respond on that. The Borders Railway project was presented to the East West Mainline Partnership 6 weeks or so ago, so that they could hear the end result of delivering a railway and how that sort of feels for local communities. What I will say is the Department for Transport did some research last year on transformational opportunities, and if you look at the literature review of the Borders Railway and how that's delivered transformational economic opportunities, the report just doesn't feel like the presentation that the East West Mainline Partnership received. It's almost two different projects. One is kind of these numeric. It's hard to attribute the successes to the railway. This is what the report says. And then when you hear local members talking about it, they talk about the transformational experience that you've just reported. And I think that comes back to actually the economic appraisal becoming quite numeric when you look at strategic transport objectives versus how it lands in a place.
Well, I would suggest the evidence is fairly hard and fast when you look at the surveys done with the people moving into there, the tourists who have come to the area since. It's fairly clear. So I'm interested to see that DFT report next year.
And for a final set of questions for this panel, back to Greg.
Thank you. Some of the points have been teased out in earlier questions on this, but I really want to turn to East West Rail's overall management of the project, particularly through the lens of resident engagement, actually being listened to. And in some ways, this is deeply personal, having all of Buckinghamshire's stretch of East West Rail in my own constituency, and indeed 19 miles of the other one being built north-south. Wootton, do you feel your residents, and perhaps if I can stretch your boundary a little bit, the residents of Bedfordshire as a whole, have been listened to at all in the process?
I said earlier about the dual carriageway linking us to Cambridge.
Yeah.
You know, probably why. And how they have done their consultation and how they have put parish councils and people first. And it's not just about us, it's not just about the town, but it's about putting people at the centre of, you know, and bringing them along. And I really do feel the consultation has been bodged and not done well. And there has been a level of distrust ever since. So you contrast the Highways Agency, who aren't the prettiest people, who aren't the best people at this sort of thing, who have, you know, pulled out the stops and really learned their lessons, and have, with East West Rail, who have a level of distrust that's almost palpable when parish councils meet with them, and with members and with councillors. You know, there is a real problem of trust between East West Rails, what they're saying, and what councillors. So you're dead right. You know, there is a problem with the consultation, and now we're going into more consultation. You know, and it's building on the consultation that's already flawed.
So what needs to change?
Personally, I think somebody in government ought to look very seriously at this and say, what are the options? You know, we're not going to change the stations, but we could perhaps make the route a little bit different. There are other routes that are cheaper and flatter. There are other routes that are more freight friendly. I'm really worried we're going to build something that's not freight friendly, and, you know, in the longer term you're building something that's going to be a possible white elephant, and that is another problem that we've actually got to look at. So all those things are in the mix, and there doesn't seem to be anybody bossing this, you know, bossing the situation of actually saying, well, look, how are you going to make these decisions? Look at it, because otherwise we're going to get so far down the planning commission and the consultation, you can't go back. And this time is about the last time we can look at all these other routes and say, there are cheaper, flatter ones, there are different ones, there are freight friendly ones, there are ones that are going to save us a lot of money. They need looking at, because every route has problems. Nothing is perfect, but they should be looked at by a whole.
Do you think, and I appreciate your geography is fairly tight,
yes,
compared to the Milton Keynes through to Cambridge stretch of East West Rail. That section is very different to that which is now pretty much already built in the Bicester through to Bletchley. It was building an old bringing an old cutting back to life. You know, came with a lot of disruption, came with a lot of pain, but it was an existing cutting.
Yeah.
Other side of Milton Keynes through to Cambridge is HS2 all over again, brand new cutting territory. Do you think residents of that section even want it? Is there that broad support for the project?
There are several routes that don't go near houses, don't require demolition of houses. These routes should be investigated. I really feel they're not been investigated seriously. We as a council have done some work, but we're a council, we're not a railway people. You know, we've commissioned people to look at it who are experts. They are looking at the routes saying, these other routes have a lot of merit. There needs to be somebody to boss this situation and go, these other routes are going to save you a lot of money and be freight friendly and all the rest of it. And there's not that boss of the situation. So when you're talking about government and you're talking about how things are done, you know, why is it the Highways Agency are getting it more or less right, even though they have upset individuals locally, whereas East West Rail have got themselves in a huge mess, and or everybody along the lines having whip rounds and precepts are going up to fight this tooth and nail.
Can I bring in Dr. Williams or Ms. Green on this point of East West Rail's overall management of the project, and the point to it, how much have real people been listened to? You know, the people that have to live with this, the construction of this thing, and then its operation in some cases literally their back garden.
I'm happy to respond first. I mean, there is no doubt that when I speak to local leaders of other local authorities along the route, there is a desperate requirement for a kind of transparent and consistent approach to engagement with East West Rail, and I think that the NAO report it said it as well, that that is an area that we need to keep working on. I work really hard to try and strengthen that, and we've asked for a standing agenda item on our board about engagement, so that East West Rail Company can report back to local authority members on a regular basis about the engagement that's being done and the approach. So I think it's there is a lot more to do. How local communities feel, I think again there's been some work done by East West Rail Company. I can only represent the local authority perspective, where when I work with the leaders and the portfolio holders, there is a genuine ambition for a rail connection between Oxford and Cambridge and all the route along it. The specifics of it, I think, affect their own local communities, and that's for those individual authorities. And there's a very varying experience.
Can I just gently ask you that on that? That's quite a statement. There, yeah, you just said there is support for the ambition of that element of the link. I'm not so sure where the evidence for that is, because I get the Stop the Art newsletters. I'm sometimes mentioned in them. In a positive way. All I see coming in, is, from my own constituency as well as further afield, is opposition. So where is the evidence for this groundswell of support for it?
Sorry, forgive me, I meant from the local authority representatives that I work with.
Okay, that's clear.
No, forgive me, that was from the local authority. From my boards, from the East West Mainline Partnership Board, EEH Board, there is a genuine support for a rail connection between across the region.
And do you think that is a replicated level of support outside the lofty towers of town halls and in real neighbourhoods?
If I may place a personal
Sure.
reflection,
Sure.
I think the history of the project has hugely skewed an understanding of what it's trying to achieve. So the story of the arc that was is very, very different from the conversation that we are having now around access to jobs, access to skills, access to opportunities. And I think that yes, that does require people working in these places to have housing, but I don't think it's a housing story alone. And I think that's where local communities, they haven't moved on from the history, is my perception.
I appreciate your perception. Dr. Williams.
So I'd say the project does have reasonably widespread business support, although businesses are busy being businesses, so they're not often engaged in this sort of thing. Is the reality. In my previous business, when we came out quite strongly in support of East West Rail, I said I would go and talk to local parishes and explain our position and why we were supportive of it. And part of that support was we support it, but we expect it to be done as sustainably, as sympathetically to the local environment as possible. The challenge we have is, having then been through that process, whether it was done that way or not, we're left in a position now, we have a single line, and as I said earlier, are we now going to go and revisit that? And that's what creates a challenge for business. So we believed, I think businesses are supportive. I've tried to engage communities as part of the place-based strategy. We appreciate quality of life, sustainability is important to them. But now we've got this single route, the thought of going back and reconsulting because something's... I don't know what tangibly has changed since that consultation that would require us to go and reconsult again.
My last question, because we're tight on time, but on this point of business support, would any business actually put their own money into building this? Because that's surely the litmus test as to whether it's wanted or not. If someone else is paying,
I think that's still being investigated. What I would say was my previous company, I won't keep naming, did put money into the Cambridge South train station project. So there is precedent for businesses contributing to significant infrastructure projects, yes.
Okay.
I'm conscious of time. Zara, you wanted a very quick supplementary.
Thank you. Mrs. Green, you just mentioned about bringing local communities with you and needing to be transparent. Surely to be transparent, you would need to know the cost of the project, and you would also need to analyse whether other projects would be better off in place of this project and the costings of those projects.
I think transparency is yes, giving as much information as you can is really important.
Thank you.
I could point them towards the National Audit Office and the recommendations in the B and C should build a new board. DLUC and DFT should build a new board and establish effective cross-party governance. As one recommendation. And DFT and DLUC should work together to bring forward a shared vision of growth in the Cambridge region. This is the National Audit Office report themselves, and they're saying these sort of things. This is damning towards East West Rail and its own governance, and it's a very, very respected people that are doing these sort of reports.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the conversation could continue, but we do have a second panel to hear from. For now, can I thank all three of you very much indeed for giving us your time and evidence this morning. Thank you. We could invite this.
The proceeding is currently suspended. 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 The proceeding is currently suspended.
Second panel for today's session. Could I invite each of the witnesses to state their name and position, please, starting with the Minister.
Good morning, Chair and Committee. I'm Hugh Merriman. I'm the Rail Minister with responsibility for East West Rail.
I'm Beth. Good morning. I'm Beth West. I'm the Chief Executive of East West Railway Company.
Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Will Garton. I'm the Director General for Levelling Up with the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities.
And I'm Bernadette Kelly, Permanent Secretary of the Department of Transport.
Thank you and welcome all, and we're grateful for your time. Apologies, we're running slightly behind schedule, but we had important issues to explore with the first panel. Before we get into the substance of today's session, Minister, I understand you would like to make a short clarification on evidence you gave to us last week.
Yes, that's very kind. I mean, I take my responsibilities in giving evidence to the committee in a sort of open and transparent manner very seriously. And after I had been before you and talked about the differences between LNER and Avanti, there was a statement from the General Secretary of ASLEF, Mick Whelan, saying that I had misled the committee on being economic with the truth, which obviously I certainly refute. But I just want to sort of explain exactly sort of how that occurred and what is therefore correct. You may recall that I mentioned that on LNER there is a concept where driver managers can drive trains where the driver quota has been fully utilised, whereas with Avanti that can only occur in industrial action or in an emergency. I think Mr Whelan had stated that I'd I had alluded to the fact that there was an agreement between LNER and ASLEF. In fact, there is no agreement. That's why you can actually have these drivers. I said there was a concept, and that concept is the concept between the driver managers and, indeed, LNER. ASLEF don't have the agreement in place. If they did, as I'd stated, they would look to end that. So I believe that I was absolutely accurate to that point. And the second item that was raised was the concept of double tripping. So a driver not being able to drive over the same rail more than once, rather than doing 2 return journeys, and the inefficiency I pointed to being 10 to 15%. And again, with that regard, Mr. Whelan referred to an agreement based on the technology being put in place and the right signalling to allow the higher speeds to facilitate this. That agreement was back in 1997. In fact, I have a copy of that agreement. It says that double tripping will be allowed beyond 2002. But the point I'm very keen to explore, and I'm actually keen to sit down with Mr. Whelan and understand this so he can explain it to me, is I don't understand why technology would preclude being able to drive over the rails twice. If you can drive over it once and it's safe and the signalling is there, then surely you can drive over it a second time. So, as I say, I've seen the agreement, which seems to say it would be allowed after 2002. It seems to talk about there being some impact on driver hours, which maybe there's an assurance that the drivers need those hours. But I want to know what it is in 2024 we can do to allow this practice to go ahead as it does across the railways. I just wanted to clarify that, and I'm grateful for you allowing me to do so, because I would never be economic with the truth or mislead Parliament, and certainly not this committee.
Right. Well, grateful for that clarification. Thank you. Now, moving on to our subject today. Beth, if I could start with you, just initially to give us an update on the sort of key decision points for East West Rail, particularly connection stages 2 and 3.
Yes.
I'm not sure if you were listening to the first panel of witnesses, but there's some concern that the route chosen through Bedford and eastwards may not be the optimal one, and there might be cheaper or more freight-friendly routes available. But could you just give us an update on where we are in that decision timeline?
Of course. And I would also like to say that I don't want to repeat what Naomi and Andy so very eloquently talked about this morning with regard to the strategic purpose of East West Rail. I thought that they explained it very, very clearly, and the importance of East West Rail and the benefits it's going to bring to the region. I'd also like to talk about how this is enabling infrastructure, and the purpose of the railway is to really build a very, very reliable commuter railway between Oxford and Cambridge, stopping at Bletchley, Milton Keynes, and at Bedford. Mr. Newlands brings up the Borders Railway, which is a really good example that we look at very carefully and closely in terms of the benefits that it's bringing. And we look a lot as well at the benefits coming to Bedford. Galashiels, which is one of the towns on Borders Railway, was in decline, is it fair to say, and has seen a huge amount of regeneration because of Borders Railway. And we are looking very much at Bedford in the same kind of way, and the opportunities that East West Rail and that connectivity is going to be able to bring to the people of Bedford to access jobs and educational opportunities across the region that they haven't had to date. In terms of what is going on with the project and how we're moving ahead with dates, the project is being delivered in phases. The first phase, the Oxford to Bicester part of the railway, is already operational. Bicester to Bletchley, and then moving on to Milton Keynes. We have a track lane, the celebration of the track lane being complete tomorrow, and that part of the railway is scheduled to open next year, and service going all the way from Oxford to Milton Keynes. For the part from Bletchley to Cambridge, we are going through our DCO process, so the Development Consent Order process, and we are planning to start our statutory consultation process in June. We're looking at that in 2 stages, because often in programs of this size, what happens in a statutory consultation is you go back and you have to go back in an unplanned way for a second statutory consultation, and we've made the decision to actually break that statutory consultation into 2 halves to be able to give our communities as much opportunity to respond to that as possible. So the first part of the consultation that we'll be having this summer will be more qualitative, and we'll be able to provide information on where we've got to since our last since the route update, and how we've been driving that forward, and we'll bring another second stage of the statutory consultation next year as the plan, with the development consent order process to follow shortly thereafter when we take in all that consultation response, and then we are planning to open the railway in the early 2030s.
Thank you. Now, there is a difference between the western section, as I still call it, of East West Rail, which is my colleague Greg Smith pointed out, is the reopening of an existing line of route. The Borders reopening was on an existing line of route. The section east of Bedford is effectively a new railway. So could you just clarify for the committee, the consultation that's coming up, are the other route options that have been put forward by the Mayor of Bedford and others still under consideration, or is it purely on, has a decision been made purely on the preferred route?
So we looked at the routes that Bedford has looked at as part of the recommendation we made for the route update announcement that was given last year in May. And we looked very thoroughly at those different options. We will, of course, look at the report that Bedford Borough Council has undertaken. We have looked at that, and in our first review, we have seen that this is very much like the routes that we have analysed thus far. But of course, we will look at that in more detail to make sure that there is no new information that we haven't already looked at. But the statutory consultation that we are going forward with in June will be based on the route update that we provided last May.
Okay, thank you. Now, transport infrastructure projects more generally have been the victim, that's the right word, of cost inflation in the construction sector. How are you putting in place adequate controls on the costs of the building process and the governance mechanism to ensure that those don't escalate?
There are several elements of that. First of all, it starts with our purpose, actually, and why are we building this railway? So this is a commuter railway that we want to be very, very reliable. So that starts with how are we going to design this, and what are the decisions we're going to make on how we're putting this railway into operation. So we want to make sure that anybody who is trying to get to the nursery pickup point at 6 o'clock in the evening is able to rely on our railway to get them there on time, and that's how people make life decisions. So we have to stick with that and try not to get into all kinds of fancy bells and whistles in our design. We are also driving very hard at how do we look at doing as little as possible, the least amount of work that we can do to deliver the outcomes that we want to achieve. So we've had the consultation responses for the last non-statutory consultation, for example. There were lots of issues that people brought up about embankment heights because they were viewed as too high. This is really important local consultation, what we've been able to do as a design we've been taking forward is actually lower the embankment heights on about 50% of those embankments, which is also going to lead us into cost savings. And my team, and I'm driving my team very, very hard to make sure that we are looking at how do we minimize the cost of delivering this railway. The industry itself often likes to build very big, shiny things as much as possible, and we are trying to change the approach on that, and we're looking at our design and what are the options that we can put forward that will reduce those costs with those same outcomes. This is a massive cultural shift, and I'm not saying it's easy, but I continue to push the team on that. We will also have a lot of work on cost management as we go through this process and through the design process and into delivery.
And one final question from me on this. You mentioned this is primarily a commuter railway, but there are many who advocate it should as well be a freight corridor. Are you satisfied that the route options that you're choosing are, as I say, freight friendly?
Yes, I am.
You are. Okay, thank you. Zara.
Thank you. Very briefly. Just Ms. West, you mentioned looking at the alternative routes thoroughly. Does that include the costings of the alternative routes?
Yes.
Thank you. Jack.
Thank you, Chair, and my question particularly to Dame Bernadette and around the BCR assessments. And obviously the BCR assessment identified the project to be low to poor value for money. So why is it that this is the case, and have you looked at other benefits and whether this could be improved?
So you're absolutely right that when I last did my accounting officer assessment in 2021, we concluded that the BCR sat between a range of 0.5 to 1.1 at that point. For technical reasons, we now think it's somewhat lower for CS2 and 3, and I can come on to that if the committee is interested. But the general point is this is not a high BCR project. I think that is principally because BCRs measure what is reasonably quantifiable and what is reasonably certain. So typically here it's transport benefits, reductions in road congestion, shorter journey times, things of that sort. But the purpose of this project, the fundamental purpose of East West Rail, is to drive transformation in the region. And we know that our BCRs are not good at capturing those wider transformational long-term strategic benefits. So in this instance, when I look at value for money in the round, as per the Green Book, I look at the BCR, but I also look at the strategic case. And in this instance, for East West Rail, the strategic case is actually quite a powerful one, based on all of the evidence we have about the potential for growth in the region, things that the National Infrastructure Commission have done many studies around the potential for growth in this region. So I would say value for money is not driven by the BCR. The BCR is relatively low. The strategic case is absolutely critical here. Two things, though, flow from that. One is it's very important to maintain a tight control on costs. And actually, I could say more about that if you'd like, because I think this is a project which is performing very well in that regard. And the second is we absolutely have to put all of our efforts into securing those strategic benefits, which goes to cross-government collaboration, because this just isn't just about transport, it's about homes, it's about investment, it's about jobs. And I'm sure we can say some more about that.
Obviously you reference the importance of the strategic case. Doesn't this really show, though, that use of BCR assessments are really no longer fit for purpose?
Well, I'm always somewhat divided when I'm asked this by committees, as I often am, between, on the one hand, wishing to defend our very rigorous transport appraisal methodology, which is the most rigorous in government, and which is actually really quite important when you're thinking about very large transport investments. It works actually for lots of investments very, very effectively. If you look at the majority of the things we do on transport,
if they're in London,
projects,
yes,
it works really
maybe
well.
Not the rest
the
of the
challenge, and we see this more and more, is that it is less good at capturing those transformational benefits. And one of the things I'm certainly challenging my analysts on, it's Will and I were just talking about this as well in terms of Green Book methodology. We do need to find ways of better measuring transformational benefits, and that is a sort of challenge for the system as well as for our transport appraisal. So I wouldn't use the language you've used, but that doesn't mean that I'm going to say it's perfect and it is not capable of improvement, because it absolutely is. One final thing on the strategic case for East West Rail in particular. When I did the accounting officer assessment in 2021, we calculated you'd only need to believe an additional £4 billion of economic benefit would accrue. Beyond that we could measure in order for it to be actually quite respectable BCR. That does not seem to me a very overly optimistic assessment, given the NIC has estimated that better connectivity in the East-West region could deliver benefits in terms of economic activity of 103 billion. So that's why I made that judgment as an accounting officer, and that's how I viewed the strategic case alongside the BCR. But your challenge to our BCR methodologies is taken and understood.
Minister, you want to come in, I think?
Yeah, the committee has always been consistent with its view on this particular point. I remember the transport infrastructure recommendations about business case. And this is one of these projects where it's important that you have the baseline, so the BCR can obviously compare where we have absolute knowns, so the comparison with roads, etc. But the example I was discussing with Bernadette when we were outside was the Jubilee line extension. So that also had a very low BCR because it was all about the transformational improvements. And if you look at what's happened at Canary Wharf since the Jubilee line and the tower blocks that are there, it's actually delivered that. But at the moment, the BCR process doesn't measure it. So it's right, as Bernadette says, that you've got a sort of baseline there, but we should just look at that as the sort of starting point and not let it be the dent in our ambitions for what can be real transformational regional growth.
Has any work been done on looking at alternative metrics that we could use to particularly add a value to more of those strategic cases? Because obviously at the moment we're not really able to compare, because obviously we haven't got any figures that we can put on necessarily some of the more strategic priorities and strategic benefits. So, and maybe Will from DLUC would want to come in on this. Are there any other metrics you've considered that we could use to assess some of these infrastructure projects?
I can do that now. So we're always looking at how we can improve the methodology. We did a substantive revision to the Green Book, I think in 2020, if memory serves me correctly, when Sajid Javid was the Chancellor. But I'm sure there is more that we can do. I agree with the way Bernadette has framed it. The BCR is excellent at capturing land value uplift where that is easier to measure. It is harder to do it in a technically robust way to measure transformational change, and I would add to that the impact on place. So a single locality, and not just looking at transport, but looking at transport, housing, regeneration, culture, education in the round. There is a metric which is described as well-being, which I think is in some ways not the best term, but that includes health benefits, for example, skills benefits, employment benefits. But they are harder to do in a technically accurate way, but we're always looking at what more we could do to improve it, yes.
And I would say, just to add to that, sort of more narrowly within the department, we do challenge ourselves on this, and indeed I challenge my analysts on this all of the time. And I think, how do we capture some of those dynamic land use change benefits? I was only discussing last week with some people from Oxera, are there different ways you could place different weightings on different aspects of a benefits case, depending on what the strategic objectives government were. So, if it was around environmental protection, you might place a greater weight on those. If it's about economic growth, you might place a greater weight on those. And there is one really good example in transport where we have actually really sort of pushed the boundaries of how we do this, which is the A303 Stonehenge. A large part of the business case there is not built on the usual time things, but on the imputed value of people being able to enjoy Stonehenge, World Heritage Site, without a road running through it. So, I do think we need to challenge ourselves, and I'm always open for great ideas, whether it's from the committee or elsewhere, as to how we can develop our methodology.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of, I just wanted to also ask you, Will, about the developments around stations. How are we ensuring that we're capturing properly the benefits of incentivising and increasing that development around stations?
Yeah, no, I mean it's a very good question. So, as the committee will know, the government made a decision to move away from the ARC as a top-down approach, and it is replaced with that sort of a more locally led approach, and the most sort of specific way in which we are making sure that we capture the benefits of the railway line are through local opportunity plans, which were funded by the Treasury at the last budget. That is £15 million to work with the local planning authority and East West Rail to make sure that housing mirrors the line and we get the benefits from both a housing and a transport perspective. So that work is ongoing now and will give us advice.
But how are we capturing in methodology that value uplift and obviously the increased revenue that the taxpayer will get from increased business rates, increased other taxes that will come as a result of that development? How are we capturing that increased value that will come from the infrastructure in those locations?
Do you mean to give me in the East West Rail business case? So, I mean,
it's perhaps a little unfair to ask Will
to explain. I can have a go, but Bernadette
to unpack. Yeah. And I'm not sure I can give you a perfect answer either.
Because it doesn't seem like we are at the moment. That's why we're concerned about it.
I think
no. Seem that the methodology is properly and effectively capturing these benefits. So
it's a really good challenge. I think in the more recent technical report, some further work was done. The BCR actually reduced, but that was nothing to do with this factor. It was because of a recalculation of some of the journeys that would be taken. It's a purely technical underpinning thing. I think additional work was done in the technical report to try and capture a bit more of the wider, slightly more uncertain economic benefits from East West Rail. I don't know, Beth, if you could say any more in detail about that, but it was a slightly different methodology.
So in the economic and technical report, we looked at what could happen. As we move forward towards our Heartland business case, I think we need to look much more at what is coming out of the local opportunity plans and what, in working with the local authorities, what is planned to happen. And so this is obviously the timing of this will be important with regard to when we submit our outline business case and our final business case, and how much detail we can put into that based on how far along the local opportunity plans we are getting. But I think it's a really important part of how do we capture those wider benefits and how do we put those into the outline business case that we'll be looking at as part of the whole outline business case. And that isn't just the local opportunity plans. It will be we need to also look at how do we capture door-to-door connectivity, which is a really important part of making sure that people are going to use the railway properly. The environmental benefits, we want to work very closely with the local authorities on making sure that the local nature recovery strategies are being included. If we can use some of our biodiversity net gain obligations to fund those nature recovery schemes, there's an opportunity to have sort of using one set of money for multiple outcomes. So we want to be able to look at that in the whole of the business case and capture that, but we have a ways to go in making that work.
Yeah, the interesting comparison is the Northumberland line, which is being built at the moment from Newcastle against restoring railway to passenger service. And in that situation, Northumberland County Council, who are also the planning authority, are the sponsor of the project, and that means that they can put in place land value capture agreements because they are both delivering the railway and they are also responsible for planning decisions as well. So if there's uplift in the land, then options can be exercised, which means that the council then shares in the benefits of growth. So that's an interesting example of where that body that has those powers is actually also heavily involved in the railway. And what I would say is that we don't always capture in the exact same way because we are not responsible for the decisions of the local planning authorities. And so that's where we're somewhat stymied from being able to capture as many benefits for this project and indeed other government projects as I've described with the Northumberland line.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much. Jack explored the BCR issue at length, but just to come in on a couple aspects of it. We've looked at BCRs for a number of times in this committee, as you well know, Minister, but it's getting to the point where nobody has any confidence in BCRs whatsoever in many ways. I know there's been changes to the Green Book and what have you, but for instance, you mentioned the Jubilee line and the fact that it's a fairly low BCR, but you can see the net results, or some of the net results of the line. But the Borders Railway, which was referenced at the start, it had a BCR of 0.5, and yet Ministers pushed ahead. Now, probably because it's such a low BCR, it was the line, the plans were under-engineered. So we had a single-track railway which should have at the very least been future-proof to allow for a double-track railway, because the success has been astonishing. But so Jack pushed at this. I think we're in agreement there's issues with BCR, but my question is looking after the fact. Now, as I understand it from an answer I got from Ms Green, is the DFT have a report which says it's hard to establish whether or not everything that's happened between Edinburgh and Peak Bank, all the developments, a new town that's been planned, all the increase in tourism, the influx of people moving there, all the success is undeniable, but yet you're not sure if you can put that alongside the new railway. So my issue is not only are we getting the VCR beforehand wrong, is we can't look at the projects afterwards and see the tangible benefits, either from a transport point of view or a socio-economic point of view. What's wrong with that?
Well, I think I'd love to do some more work based on what you're saying, maybe with colleagues in Transport.
I'd love to hear.
It sounds like a really, really good case study, and exactly the sort of thing that we should be doing some more work on and making sure that we fully understood, in order that can inform our kind of approach to these things going forwards. I mean, we do evaluate projects and we do evaluate benefits.
I don't doubt it. It's how we're doing it.
Anyway, so that certainly does happen routinely for all of our big transport projects. But I think the challenge I'm getting from the committee here is that sort of we need to continue to sort of be more innovative and imaginative about how we do this, and I'm keen to take that challenge back to my colleagues in the Treasury and colleagues. Well, I think they're open. But I would also repeat something the Minister said, which is we don't get too fixated on BCRs. The strategic case is a concept that we understand. It is a concept which actually has been given much more prominence by the Treasury in the Green Book. Actually, on East West Rail, I was kind of conscious when I was doing the accounting officer assessment that we were sort of pushing the boundaries, as it were, of how you do strategic case analysis for the purposes of value for money assessment. And I think that was the right thing to do. So we do have that sort of kind of part of the kind of suite of how we do these things as well. And it shouldn't be underestimated just because it doesn't come up with a convenient, hard number.
I agree with your final point, but Welsh Treasury officials are obsessed with BCR. It's rather difficult. I'd be quite keen to touch base offline in terms of what the DFT thinks of the Borders Railway, etc. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. I'll come to the Minister and Kelly first. The National Audit Office recommended that the government should set out the critical success factors for achieving the intended benefits from East West Rail. What are the critical success factors?
The success factors will be the delivery of the transformational growth and opportunities that we talk to. I'm not seeking to avoid answering the question, but I think, do you mind if I hand over to Bernadette just to go through the details of the NAO report, which of course we welcome the recommendations. They're positive. They obviously don't look at certain things we've been talking about, including the BCR, but they do have some recommendations as to how we should take this forward across government.
Yeah.
And I think Bernadette can actually give you some examples of what we'll be doing as a result as part of the response to that. Is that okay?
Would that also include what you perceive to be the success factors of this project?
Well, we'll go through that, and then I'll come back to actually then how we believe that will deliver.
So I think the first, obviously the most immediate critical success factor is delivering the railway to time, schedule, and services running as intended. So there's a sort of narrow set of success factors, which is successful delivery of the project itself, which I'm sure Beth can talk to in further detail. I suspect I'll check on the particular bit of the NAO report. They're probably talking about the wider transformation, which is, we've all agreed, is critical to this. I think what the NAO report concluded, in order for us to be able to do that, is that we need a much stronger cross-government approach to the delivery of this railway and the associated benefits. And so that is what we are now working hard to ensure is in place. We've set up an economic growth board. The Treasury chairs this board. It's an economic growth board for East West Rail. The Treasury chairs it, and it includes senior colleagues from my department, from DLUC, from DBT, DCIT and the IPA. It has established 6 work streams around placemaking, science, business investment, transport delivery, including wider connectivity, development models for investment and sites around East West Rail, and overall alignment between East West Rail and the plan for Cambridge. And what we would expect to come out of that is some clear sort of milestones for the interventions, the broader suite of government interventions that is needed in order to deliver ultimately on the objectives of this railway and on the strategic case. I can't describe those to you now, because I think what we're doing is putting in place the machinery to ensure that we can map those critical success points out. The other thing I would say is wider regional partnership beyond government is the other critical element of that. Beth is leading a lot of that work from East West Rail with local partners. She's talked about local opportunity plans. There's also now an Oxford to Cambridge pan-regional partnership, which is more business-led, I think, under DLUC, bringing partners together. And I think DLUC have established a Cambridge delivery group. Now, all of these things are essentially looking at same facets of the same, are looking at facets of the same objective. I think our job, and I think the Growth Board, the East West Rail Growth Board will need to do this, is to pull this together into a plan for sort of 10, 20 and 30-year transformation, which is what this railway is intended to underpin.
So what would you then say that is the minimum level of new development for this project to be justifiable?
So I talked in my 2020, in my 2021 assessment, we just don't look at it through a purely sort of technical lens. In the strategic case, we worked out that a £4 billion increase in benefits would lead to a BCR, I'm just sort of working it backwards here, of 1.5, which means that you move the BCR from poor to respectable value for money. That was equivalent to about 56,000 houses we assessed at the time. Now, I took that £4 billion, again, compared with an NIC estimate of potentially £103 billion of economic activity flowing from better connectivity as a reasonably conservative estimate. So, what I can't do is say you need this particular development here, this one here. The question is, do we have a plan collectively across government to deliver a sort of whole range of economic activity, which then flows through ultimately to the benefits case for the railway?
And so what are you doing to try and attract the private investment around the project?
Do you want to...
Yeah, shall I come back to now sort of the point now Bernadette set it out? I should just correct, the NAO looked at the changes in the benefit cost ratio over time, but they didn't provide an assessment of the project's value for money. That's the part I should have said. But they did obviously recognise that the whole case for East West Rail doesn't rest on the strength of the benefit cost ratio alone. It actually sort of balances itself on the region's potential for economic growth and prosperity. So that's, again, we come back to the sort of transformational value that BCR doesn't necessarily capture. And perhaps if I could just encapsulate it in terms of how I see it, and particularly the times I've been up to visit and speak to the business community, and particularly the sort of bioscience and health community, what they need, and the same for Cambridge, also applies for Oxford, is they need a workforce to be able to deliver their ambitions. If we are to compete, not just between those university cities with each other, but they work on a global stage. They have to compete with the Americas, they have to compete with Southeast Asia, where they've got a sort of wider sort of cluster hub to be able to work on in terms of land. And what struck me when I was talking to some of the scientists and tech people in the Cambridge South Bio Health and Science Park was that they need the workforce. They don't just need the pioneers. They need to deliver an entire village in order to put their products to market and succeed. And that's something that there is a huge constraint with. In Cambridge and Oxford, you've got two cities there with incredibly high house prices that mean a workforce struggles to be able to afford. And the aim of this railway is to be able to connect those people. And of course, we know that when a railway is delivered, then the infrastructure is in place that allows local planning authorities to make decisions on housing that they may not be able to make if that railway infrastructure isn't in place. So that's very much why we're building this. It's not so much a railway line for journeys between Oxford and Cambridge. It's actually the ability to be able to move to Bletchley, to Winslow, to Bicester, and then be able to travel by rail and potentially from outside of the area, and then to allow Milton Keynes in the middle of those to also become part of that sort of cluster hub as well. So that's the sort of vision we have for what the railway can do. But as I say, it's for local planning authorities to decide if it makes sense for them to allocate housing around their area or elsewhere. But we certainly sort of envisage that Tempsford, for example, will become a new town off the back of the railway. But that is a matter for local authorities to determine. Often there's criticism that the infrastructure isn't in place. Here's an example where we are looking to put the infrastructure in place so that that's there for decision makers to be able to rely on when deciding whether to grant housing.
So going back to the question, what level of private investment, obviously looking at growing the economy, is needed to justify the investment that the government is putting in?
Well, I mean, again, it comes back to some of the points we've been discussing. Our job is to put the seed money in to actually deliver the railway line, and that's being provided by the UK taxpayer. And that itself then allows private investment to determine, both in terms of their ability to expand, bring products to market in Cambridge, Oxford, and across the line of route. And it also allows private developers to decide if they want to put planning applications in, deliver sort of new housing developments. That will be off the back of this. But
so is the answer we don't know?
Well, so we can make some, again, it comes back to the BCR point. We can't actually price those in because those are matters that could occur, but they are contingent on the decisions of private business as to whether they actually wish to do that. So we can't force that to occur because we are not delivering the housing, we're delivering the railway. What we know is where you deliver a railway, you're more likely to attract the work, the jobs, the housing off the back of it, and that's what this growth board across government is designed to do. And I don't know, Beth, if you want to talk about some of the individual things that you are actually doing, but let's be clear, Beth is building a railway, she's not actually building a housing estate here.
I agree with you there, but she's building a railway, and the advantages of building the railway is to grow the local economy, so there has to be...
Yeah, so that would occur. What I'm saying is it's not the role of government, because of the way we set our government up, to build those the direct jobs, the direct houses. That's the role of the private sector. What we're saying is the private sector is likely to do that, and we listen to the private sector in terms of where they want the railway to go, not least into Cambridge South, so that it will give maximum opportunities to the private sector. But we don't physically actually build those homes or actually build those offices. We just build the infrastructure which allows that, it becomes a bedrock for private industry to then deliver what I've just described.
I just got, and we recently visited Japan, and we look at the stations built there and the private investment that goes into the stations there. It seems that they are able to plan and justify why they're building certain lines and stations because of the private investment that they know is going to come in when this project is being built. So surely we need an overall look at the picture to say, actually, this is going to happen, and that it seems like you're saying that.
Right. Yeah. So our model is different to the Japanese model. I mean, I would describe the Japanese model as property organisations that then also run railways, whereas we deliver railways as far as government's concerned. A lot of the railway land was sold off during the 80s, and the other thing the Japanese did was they wrote off all of the debt behind the railways. When we take land, for example, we take enough land to deliver the railway. We do not take more land off landowners to then deliver a town on it. That's just not the way that the model works. And if you look at some of the controversies around HS2, for example, for us to actually compulsory purchase more land off the railway and then actually sort of build those towns is just not something that our model does. Now, you could argue that we should be doing that, but it's just not the current model. What we do is build infrastructure which then allows local authorities, the decision makers, private investors to bring forward the homes, the offices, the housing developments on the back of the railway. And that's the model that we use in this country.
And if I could use the Cambridge Biomedical Campus as an example of where this is really going to, it is likely to come to fruition. Currently there are about 20,000 jobs on the Cambridge Biomedical Campus, which is the site of the new Cambridge South Station. So, but the Biomedical Campus is seeking to expand, to double that. And what we've looked at is the congestion, the car congestion getting to the Cambridge Biomedical Campus, which is horrendous, and it's really quite gridlocked around there. So I think the likelihood of that doubling of the jobs in the Biomedical Campus is highly unlikely unless we have east-west rail connectivity in addition to the north-west connectivity at Cambridge South. And the reason for that is, as the Rail Minister has said, that the Biomedical Campus itself has a range of different jobs. They've got the hospitals there, so you've got key workers, and much of that, the housing costs in Cambridge are very high, as they are south of Cambridge. So the opportunities for for key workers to come across are actually from the west of Cambridge and looking at places like Camborne and all the way across to Bedford and even on the Marston Vale line. But in order to get those additional 20,000 jobs or to expand even further, you have to find the ways to bring people into that space. So what the railway does is it enables those opportunities to come to pass, and it's the Biomedical Campus to work with their private sector partners and the Science Supercluster board members, as Dr. Williams was talking about, to really drive that forward. And it's great that we have the Science Supercluster board that's formed, because it's a real opportunity for the private sector to be able to express their objectives with regard to that cluster across, that very unique ecosystem that we could build from Oxford to Cambridge, because right now it feels like when you visit Oxford or Cambridge, they are on different planets from each other. And in order to get to the scale that we're looking at in terms of this global opportunity, the railway is the thing that's going to drive that private sector investment, and that's what we continue to hear. And that's I know the different private sector investors and venture capital firms and people who are looking to invest are looking for that scale, because they want a workforce that's going to be able to basically people to come and live in the region and then make their lives in the region and not have to move around. And you can't do that without the scale, and you can't get the scale without that connectivity.
Okay. Is there any mechanism for capturing the land value increases that may arise from the project?
So we've just touched on that. I gave an example of one where, whilst we're funding the bulk of it, the project sponsor is the local authority who also deal with planning, so they have the mechanism to be able to capture land value in a sort of smart way in that sense. It's more limited in this particular situation because it's down to the local planning authorities to make determinations, and they're not part of this has been delivered by the East West Rail company on behalf of government to actually deliver. So there's more of a challenge to be able to capture land value in the way that I've described in Northumberland compared to on this particular project. Of course, we will share in the proceeds. When the economic growth increases, then tax receipts increase, so we receive the return in that way. But there's not the same direct capture that I just described up in Northumberland. And I think it's interesting to get the committee's ideas on how that can be better captured, because it's something that I have a real passion for myself.
Thank you. I just want to loop back to the discussion we've had about having a wider appraisal. You've touched on that. We've got our current model. One of our exam questions is there a better model? And Dame Bernadette, you've talked about your sort of 6 strands of delivery. Arguably, should that not have come first and appraised, what the benefits are before the stop-go decision's made? I appreciate some of the wider benefits are difficult to encapsulate, but there are also costs as well. Yeah. So with extra housing comes extra utility costs, public service costs. So what we are trying to arrive at is a better mechanism for capturing, beyond the narrow BCR, both those wider benefits and costs. Yeah. And if you had your time over again with this project, how would you have done it better to appraise it in the round?
I think in some ways it is, you're asking me whether we should do all the work in government to come up with detailed plans to map out the entirety of interventions, and could we have done that before we started the railway? My experience of many years of working in government on these things is quite hard to sort of genuinely get a focus on sort of specific action plans that departments across government will then be taking forwards, where you haven't got a catalyst for that work and for that kind of investment of money, time and effort. So, and in this case, East West Rail is that catalyst. Would I, like in an ideal world, to have a 20-year mapped out plan for every single big transformational project we do? Well, that would certainly make life, sort of easier, but that sort of is in reality, and we see it with other major projects as well. That is not how our system works. I think you kind of need to be clear about a strategic case, be clear about what the proposed investment is, and then use that to drive, I think, the benefits realisation. The benefits won't be realised in the end by everybody else, whether it's private sector or other bits of government, unless they believe that the transport investment is happening. So I think that's why we are where we are, and we can imagine different worlds, but I'm not sure they're necessarily more plausible than the one we're in. Or more deliverable.
That's the question we're trying to.
It's a bit chicken egg to a certain extent, because, as you rightly say, the railway line is sort of fixed as it on its first phase, as it goes from Oxford to Bletchley, and then we move from Bletchley to Bedford, and then there are the choices part, because we're dealing with new railway, and we have to still go through the 2 statutory consultation process, then the development consent order, then there'll be another full business case put together off the back of that. So there are still determinations to be made. So whilst the board is set up to actually work on the basis that we'll deliver in full from Oxford to Cambridge, there are still some variables in the process which then impact how the board can actually deliver to its work as well. So I just sort of put that part in, because we're still very much, we will expect to have the first phase completed by next year. The other work, particularly the work between Bedford and Cambridge, involved new lines. So therefore, I think it's right to have the 2 running alongside each other in terms of realising the benefits, working across government to do that. but at the same time, there are still determinations to be made about how it's done.
Thank you.
Very
quick, because I'm conscious of time. We need to.
I'm just reflecting on your point, and I just listening to the Minister as well, and I suppose just reflecting on my own experience of these large projects, whether it's HS2, whether it's East West Rail, we'll be now looking at Northern Powerhouse Rail. Typically, at the initiation stage, there is this great focus on the wider economic case, the benefits, the long-term strategic vision for the project and region in place. There is sometimes then a tendency when we start the transport investment for that to fall away and for us to narrow our sights onto delivering a railway. I think what we therefore need to be better at doing in government, and I think we are actively doing this now on East West Rail, is not allow that to happen, but always to maintain that strategic focus. I think that's what the NAA report was really about challenging us to do. I think the recommendations in the NAA report were entirely sensible, and as I sort of look at them here, I think we're pretty much acting on all of them now, because it's all about igniting that wider cross-government, but also wider collaboration and partnership with the private sector and with local authorities to deliver on the vision. And I think, lesson I would take from all of this is make sure that sort of wider collaboration is always there at every stage in the project.
Thank you. Mick.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And this to Dame Bernadette. The rationale for the DFC's investments in East West Rail is based on its wider strategic case. Can you set out that strategic case as how it's evolved over time? And for example, housing plans chased, roads cancelled.
I mean, I can talk about what the strategic case is, but it's a sort of also a sort of matter of policy and ministerial choice as well. Essentially, though, and I'll start and then hand over, is the Oxford to Cambridge region is one of the highest growth and most highest growth regions of the country. It's also one of the highest potential for growth in the country. Poor connectivity is constraining that growth. It is, world leading in terms of its innovation, tech clusters, universities, and high value jobs. The strategic case is that better transport connectivity will allow us to grow that economy and grow those jobs and grow that value, bringing more people into those jobs. At the moment, this is unusual in that some of our other growth projects are about sort of regeneration. What's unusual about East West Rail is that the lack of transport connectivity is a known bottleneck now to business investment and to homes and to jobs and to the creation of more lab space and so forth in Cambridge. So right now the lack of connectivity is an actual bottleneck, and by tackling that you tackle the bottleneck and you allow further growth. So I think that's the fundamental of it, but I'm sure either Beth or the Minister can give a better version.
I'll be very brief because I've already touched on this. It is to allow both Oxford and Cambridge to continue to be at the top of their game, to compete globally in terms of bioscience, biohealth, technology, and ensure that it will only be able to do that if it's got a workforce behind it. And so the opportunity here is to deliver that workforce. Anyone that drives around Oxford or Cambridge or cycles around it will actually see how constrained it is from a car perspective, and we need to be able to deliver people in a matter that's more sustainable from an environmental perspective and also from a productivity perspective in terms of congestion. And the other thing to add on there, and again Mr. Smith will be well aware of this in terms of his constituency, and I am in terms of growing up, is that there is already a huge amount of house building going across between Oxford and Cambridge right now, and therefore the ability to deliver a railway will also provide better productivity for people to travel and also better sort of inputs on the environment as well. So that's really the sort of driver for why the railway is being planned between Oxford and Cambridge.
Okay. And what, a supplementary question, Chair, what levers does the DFC have within government to ensure these wider aims are achieved?
So that's where our ability to work really closely with the Department for Levelling Up, being an example with Will being here, allows us to do that. And not just in this particular example. So I sit on a number of inter-ministerial groups where we look, for example, at where we can specifically help Bradford, Crewe, some other parts of the country where there is levelling up funding going in. And the Department for Levelling Up will want to know, well, what transport additions can you put in here? Because if we actually see it as an area for growth, for regeneration, then we need to make sure that transport infrastructure is in place for us to do that, and then vice versa. We don't want to build a railway where we're actually not going to get any economic growth or benefits from it either. So I think we all work really well together. And the growth board that Bernadette described will allow us to do that, and it's chaired by Treasury as well, so it's bringing more than our two departments together.
Okay, my final question, and this is to Will. According to the NAO's report, GLUC does not have a team dedicated in supporting the East West Rail project. Can you set out how East West Rail fits within the strategic aims set by your department?
Yeah, of course I can. So that's absolutely right. We did have a dedicated team looking at East West Rail. When we made the decision to disband the Oxcam arc as previously envisaged, that team was moved to other things, because we now have a bottom-up, locally led approach with the local planning authorities along the line taking a lead in terms of new housing developments. And as I mentioned earlier, the government's funding some of those developments to help them get off the ground, but it's not done centrally by the department. So that is the government's approach. That's a policy decision to do it that way around. The team that I do have working for me, though, where I think we will get huge benefits from East West Rail, is a team focused on delivering the Secretary of State's ambition for Cambridge. The Minister and Beth have already talked about the constraints in Cambridge, but we have here a jewel in the UK's crown. It is highly constrained by lack of lab space. Some of our most successful tech firms are waiting a year or more in order to get lab space. There is just simply not enough housing in the region. That is why the Secretary of State has spoken about a new quarter in Cambridge, built in a way that is consistent with the city, that's integrated into the city. The Chancellor will say more about it in the budget this afternoon. But GLUC has a huge focus on Cambridge specifically, and Cambridge South, because this is a massive economic opportunity for us all, and the constraints to growth are very real, and that is where the department is putting its efforts now.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Conscious of time, we're in the last 10 minutes and we've still got a few areas we want to cover, so I can urge brief questions and answers. Jack.
Thank you, Chair. And first to Beth, I just wanted to ask about communication with communities, because that is another issue that was identified by the NAO as being not good enough. So what have you done to improve that communication?
So I think this is something that is extremely important, but also we take our responsibilities. I take my responsibilities to the taxpayer very seriously as well. So just to give you an example of what we've been doing, we've set up 15 local representative groups across the region. We meet on a regular basis, so we've had over 90 meetings with parish warden and county council councillors who sit on these local representative groups. Last year, after we had our route update announcement, we had 21 drop-in events across the route that were attended by 2,300 people. So that was the opportunity to people to come in, ask us questions, and have a greater understanding of the route. We have to balance, though, our budget. We can't spend endless amounts of money in terms of having these events. So we are trying to strike a balance between how we are engaging with the community, which is very, very important. And I think what's most important is we are listening to what those responses are. So to give you an example, from the non-statutory consultation on the Marston Vale line, we had conflicting responses. So we had one half of a group of people saying that they wanted one set of outcomes and another half saying they wanted a different set of outcomes. We have to balance out how do we get the widest possible benefits and understanding what those responses are. So we are always balancing between our obligations to the taxpayers to keep our budget as low as possible and wanting to get the best engagement with those communities. So we are constantly adapting, changing, learning, listening to make sure that we are trying to have as much engagement as we possibly can. When we have our statutory consultation in the summer, we will be having drop-in events again, where we will be recording responses from the public. We will be receiving formal consultation responses from the public, and then we will have our second planned statutory consultation next year, which again is another opportunity, which is not normal in what projects of this scale do. So we're having two opportunities for the public to respond through the consultation process.
Dame Bernadette, this seems to be a common theme because we've seen with other major infrastructure projects, HS2 Limited, we've seen in my own area in Staffordshire very poor communication with those communities. Is this not something that is a common theme that seems to be emerging across major infrastructure projects in the UK?
I think it is always the case that when major infrastructure projects are in the process of being built, that is disruptive for local communities, and that gives rise to a lot of concern from local communities. So absolutely, that is a theme. I think the challenge for East West Rail, the challenge for HS2, challenge for Network Rail when they're engaged in delivering these projects is to be excellent at engaging with those communities to mitigate and manage the disruption and to understand the concerns that they have. So it is a feature, I would say, of major projects, yes, and I think the challenge is to be as good as we possibly can be to all our delivery partners at addressing those local concerns. And I know this is something the Minister challenges us on as well.
I'm conscious of time, so I won't give you reasons why we agree entirely with that.
Could I add one bit there, please?
Very briefly.
The other issue that we've got is about when we provide information, and this is really difficult because designs are always progressing and developing, and what we don't want to be doing is putting information into the public domain that might be misleading. So we have to be very careful, and when we share information, we want to make sure that what we're sharing with the public is the right information at the right time.
In terms of learning the lessons from East West Rail and some of the issues that we've had and how we can improve the future, particularly when we're thinking about Network North and some of the other schemes, what more is being done to ensure that we do learn those lessons when we're taking projects forward, and particularly around ensuring that we take account of more of those strategic benefits from those projects?
Look, we'll be in your hands in terms of recommendations you'd make. What I would just say, and I'm going up tomorrow to see the East West Rail team. It's the final part of track laying. The first phase is being delivered to time and budget, and it would have been delivered earlier if there hadn't been a third-party issue. So I think the team, Beth's team, have done really well on this. So the first thing I want to say is that we often look at projects where we haven't got time and budget right, and actually East West Rail is one. So actually I want to learn the positive lessons for others as to where they can utilise. East West Rail is a slim team, and I think there's something to be said for that. And we'll always make sure that we learn lessons, as we are from Crossrail in terms of the digital tie-in of the railway to HS2, that we'll need to learn those lessons as well.
So in terms of assessing this, obviously it's done in a whole project. The BCR was done for the whole project, I presume, or as a corridor. Is the thought about possibly doing that for other schemes? I know we obviously talked about that east-west link between Felixstowe across to Liverpool via Stoke-on-Trent. We want to enhance that. But at the moment it seems very piecemeal. We've obviously got the Ely Junction scheme, we've got some other pockets of schemes that are happening, but is there not a thought about looking more when we're doing these assessments at whole corridor assessments so that we can properly extract the benefits of those schemes? So
that's a really good point. And actually, if I look at the Northern Powerhouse Rail and the inclusion of Hull and also the electrification in North Wales, then you can actually look at it strategically as going from Holyhead all the way through to Hull in that particular part. And then the question is, well, actually, are there any parts that aren't then included? Strategically, do we need to look at that because it gives a much higher BCR, or indeed it's a much bigger transformational opportunity if we're looking beyond the BCR, as we've talked about? Then that should actually be driving our decision making. I agree very much with that.
And there are areas where we do try and use whole corridor methodology and bring that into our thinking as well. We've certainly done that quite a lot on the roadside, where we've looked at sort of corridor impacts and benefits alongside the impacts of enhancing a bit of a road in one particular place. So it's a concept that we definitely do already think about, but I'm sure there's more we can do there too.
There isn't more time, so I'll hand back to the
Thank you. Graham.
Thanks, Chair. Just on one of these quick as I can. Beth, can I go straight to you about electrification? I saw some of your comments, and you may have seen the earlier panel about the need to address transport emissions, environmental challenges, decarbonising transport, tackling climate change. Will this line be electrified, and how much more will it from the beginning, and how much more would it cost to retrospectively electrify the line?
So you'll appreciate that we're working very closely with the department overall on decarbonisation objectives. So we are trying to make sure that we are absolutely part of what that strategy is going to be going forward. The first phase that's going to be opening next year will be running on diesel trains, but we will be announcing what our traction power solution is going to be in the statutory consultation.
Will they be tri-modal trains or will they be exclusively diesel?
That will be part of the consultation exercise.
Okay, I'm short of time, so I'm going to go straight to the Minister. And I've got a question you touched on actually about Northern Powerhouse Rail and what strategic objectives you're going to prioritise when you're appraising Network North's proposed projects. What lessons have we learned or have you learned from this process, particularly in relation to the BCR and other factors that you'll apply when you're looking at schemes from my region?
Yeah, so actually, again, I think it's really important. It does place the accounting officer in a difficult position in terms of the BCR because we talk about the transformational opportunities and we look beyond that and we've given examples. Jubilee Line, Canary Wharf is one such, but there are others where actually, in hindsight, you look at it and think the BCR was far too negative compared to what's really happened. And I want that to be our guiding light. The challenge it puts Dame Bernadette in from the Transport Department's perspective is that requires a letter which then requires a ministerial direction because it doesn't look a strong enough BCR. So therefore, that's why we're interested in your ideas, is how we can properly value a project from the outset and allow it to go forward without that difficulty in place. Because, as you say, it regenerates areas, it provides a huge amount of opportunities, skills, it gives young people an opportunity they would never have had without a railway. And I'm really passionate about those projects and I want them to score properly as well. I also want to just touch on the electrification point. Great Western Rail have just finished a battery exercise that allowed them on a single charge to deliver 86 miles of journey. This, between Oxford and Cambridge, the indicative mileage is 84. So that would demonstrate the technology is getting us to a place where battery technology and the ability to charge as you go, and that's the test that GWR are putting in place in Greenford, would allow this form of technology to be put in place. So yes, the starting point has been diesel because of the architecture of the existing line, but we are looking to make decisions for the summer, working with the Treasury, as to whether we can come up with a better form of transport technology which decarbonises this line.
I think there was a very good example in which you saw in Glasgow. Do you remember the self-charging battery train?
Viva Rail. So the test I've just described is Viva Rail. So when it went into administration, GWR, with department funding, took the assets over, and they're using this. And as I say, they've got a 3.5 mile stretch of line where you charge, and then it allows the train to then continue. And that's what I would really like to see in place on the East West Rail.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. I'm sure we could continue the discussion, but there are other parliamentary events today. So for this session to close, we will be revisiting the subjects later on in our inquiry. But for now, thank you again. Order, order.
The proceeding has ended. 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 The proceeding has ended.